Okay, welcome to the lecture series on economic puzzles. We're just going to talk about 4 today, but we'll have several other lectures that will be in the same vein to follow. So we want to try to keep these in nice, manageable sizes. Okay, the first one is waiting in line at the DMV. Now, this is an experience that just about everybody of driving age has had to go through. Whether it's the first time you get your driver's license, or if you're just going down there to get a renewal, or to change your address, or whatever might be the reason why you're at the DMV. Now, certainly in Texas, and I've experienced this myself, the lines can be really long. And I don't mean just 30 minutes or an hour, but it could be several hours before somebody attends to you. And they are these big mega sites that they have, and there's hundreds of people that are in line. And they're certainly more advanced than they used to be. There's a lot more reliance on electronics, and nowadays you can even sort of virtually wait in line on your cell phone. But let's just imagine you're just doing it the old-fashioned way and you're waiting in line. And you've already been in line for about 45 minutes, and your spouse texts you, "Hey, when are you going to be home?" He said, "Well, I'm waiting in line still at the DMV. Well, I need you to pick up some, a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread." And you think, okay, well, I can do that. Now, I want you to just think for a moment about the question that I'm going to pose to you. And the question literally does not have a right or wrong answer, but the way in which you go about answering the question does. So the logic that you use to come to a conclusion makes a difference, even though perfectly reasonable people may answer the question in different ways. As long as you're using the same logic, you're going to be okay. Now, you're thinking, gee, do I stay in line or do I get out of the line? If I stay in line, you maybe have some kind of rough idea that because of how long it took you to get this far, that you got probably about another hour and 15 minutes in line. And you know that if you get out of the line and you hurry up and go do the little errand that your spouse has asked you to do, that you'll just have to come back some other day, in which case that 45 minutes that you spent waiting in line is wasted. So the question is not whether or not getting out of the line or staying in the line is the right answer, because remember, I already covered that it may be right or wrong depending upon your own circumstances. So let's dispense with that. That's not really the main question. The main question is, does the 45 minutes that you already spent waiting in line matter? Does it form part of the calculus about whether or not you remain in line or get out of the line? And for many people, this is absolutely a tough barrier to get over, because most people will say almost unequivocally that yes, of course it matters, it's an investment. But economists will typically respond by saying, it's not really an investment. What it really is a sunk cost. And it's a cost you can't get back, meaning it's like spilt milk. I mean, when somebody spilt milk, there's no sense in crying about it, just clean up the mess. So what really should matter is the cost of my time waiting in line right now, the cost that I have under my control, not the cost that was in the past, but the cost that's in the future. Is that cost going to exceed the benefit of getting out of the line? If that cost exceeds the benefit of getting out of the line, well then, by golly, I should get out of the line and go do my errand. But if the costs are a lot smaller than the benefits associated with getting out of the line, then it may very well be that it makes more sense for me to remain in the line. So the only thing you really care about at that point is weighing marginal costs and marginal benefits. So if the marginal benefit of waiting in the line is a little bit greater than the marginal cost of remaining in the line, then you do that. But if the marginal benefit of getting home quickly with that errand is greater than the marginal cost of waiting, then that needs to be the route that you need to take. So sunk costs are what we call historical costs. And the reason why we say that is because they're in the past and you can't get them back. So they don't figure in to your decision making. Only marginal costs and marginal benefits matter. All right, second one is flying standby. Now, flying standby is different today than it used to be, and mainly because of 2001, the terrorist attacks in the United States. In the old days, it used to be quite common to be able to just go right up to the airport and just, say, hey, look, I don't have a ticket. I need to be on standby. And they would they'd put you on a list, and you would wait to see if some of the ticketed passengers don't show, and then they'd be able to put you on the aircraft. That still happens to some degree today. I mean, standby still exists, but it's just a little bit harder, and of course it's a much more riskier proposition because of all the waiting in line that you have to do. But for many business people, that often would be a standard operating procedure when they got into a bind and they had some kind of last-minute flight that they had to take to attend an important business meeting. Now, let's stylize this example a little bit just so that we can easily wrap our head around it. And also try not to come into this problem with any kind of preconceived notions about what you think will happen. I want you to look at the logic of the whole problem. So imagine this. Imagine that it's already 15 minutes before boarding time, and of course at that point, if you're a ticketed passenger and you don't have a boarding pass, you can't get on the aircraft, right? That's the general rule. And so that means that those seats are then released to passengers that have put themselves on a standby list. Now let's say that the cost associated with flying you from Houston to New York City is $75. Now where did I get that figure? Maybe $75 is all the costs that are required for the extra fuel that'll be necessary for the plane to get off the ground and to land in New York City and back. And why do I say the extra fuel? Well, if there's extra weight, there's going to be extra fuel. So I just made that number up, but that would pretty much be the only variable expense. There wouldn't be really any other expense. All the other expenses, what you pay the pilot and the stewardesses and the stewards and everybody else that's helping make this flight possible, the flight crew, the mechanics crew, those are all fixed costs. So let's just say that a ticket to fly from Houston, New York is $900. And let's say, for example, that you're about ready to board and they're about ready to charge a credit card, and they say, well, Mr. Gosselin, that'll be $900. And you say to yourself, well, gee, I only have $700 worth of credit on my credit card. And you tell the agent that, and they say, well, gee, we're sorry, we can't help you, it's $900, and that's the end. Now, that answer would be the answer you would typically get, right? The question is that a rational answer, right? Now, of course, if they're an employee, it's a rational answer because they need to follow the rules. But is it a rational answer on the part of the airline company? Well, I think we could probably see, perhaps, that it's not entirely rational. Now, why is that? Well, if that plane takes off without me, it also takes off without my $700. And remember, it's only going to cost me $75 to fly to New York and back, right? And so the net gain to the airline is fairly substantial. So what is it giving up? It's giving up that net gain, the difference between the cost of my boarding the aircraft versus the revenue that the airline would get by my boarding that aircraft. So not entirely rational decision. Now, why is it, though, that we don't see this happen more often, since it seems to be a pretty logical way of doing business? Pretty much because the word would get out in a hurry. And if the word got out in a hurry, that would become a typical way in which people would travel, knowing that they could get away with this differential between costs and revenue. Okay, the third one is what I call the 10-cent pill. Let's just imagine the following scenario, that a pharmaceutical company has come up with some new pill that is a cure for all known diseases that man is aware of, okay? That's it. So it's not a cure for broken bones. It's not a cure for, trauma victims if they get in an accident. Nothing like that. It's just a cure for diseases. That's it. For everything from cancer to polio, you name it. Now, would this be devastating to the economy? Because, of course, it at least appears that it would have a big impact on the health professions. Or would this actually be a boon to the economy? And I often ask students an open-ended question like this, and I said, spend a couple of minutes thinking about this and writing out an answer. And in fact, don't just say yes or no. Spell out some reasons of why you think the way you're thinking, or why what are the justifications for the answer that you're providing. And more often than not, although there'll still be a significant minority that will argue on the other side, but an overwhelming majority will say, yeah, that's bad news for the economy because all these healthcare professionals will lose their jobs. Now, again, typically in a lot of economic questions, answers like that appeal to intuition are right at some level. It would cost large chunks of people in the health professions their jobs. But is that a bad thing overall? Well, it can't be, because after all, if people are cured of their maladies, cured of their sicknesses and their diseases, that's got to be a good thing, because then there would be reduced turnover at the workplace. People would be less inclined to be tardy and less inclined to be leaving early because they're sick, and there would be lower levels of absenteeism, and productivity would increase, and economic growth would go up, and you'd have a greater economic pie, and everyone would benefit. And in fact, there would be whole hosts of other industries that would wind up thriving as a result of this increase in productivity. But what about all those doctors and those nurses and those radiologists and nurses and other people in the allied health professions that will lose their jobs? Well, these are pretty smart people. They would be able to retrain in other areas. And usually, something like this doesn't have an immediate impact on the economy, that is, or an immediate impact on that particular industry, but it's usually a gradual effect. That is, people see the writing on the wall, and then what do? They decide that they have to go back and get some training in another field so that they can earn a living in a different way. And the type of productivity that people like that are in that profession are likely to provide for the economy as a whole is immeasurable, right? There's no limit to the things that they could do for the economy and provide for the economy. The last one is a fun one. I call it the black box. It's called the Paradox of Scarcity. And in this black box, let's assume that you can put anything in the black box, and you can program it to produce anything on the other end. So you put something into the black box, and on the outside of the black box, after you program, a finished product shows up. So maybe you put in some aluminum, right, and a can comes out. Or maybe you put in some paper products and a box comes out. Or maybe you put in something sort of just real silly, like water, and something entirely unrelated from water shows up on the other end. Remember, it's a black box. It's a magical box. Almost sounds like a box from, Star Trek. When the people on Star Trek go on to the USS Enterprise and press a little button and they say hot soup, and this little drawer opens up and you see hot chicken soup there, sitting there. It almost looks like it just was produced out of thin air. The question is, would this eliminate scarcity, right? And again, I usually pose this as an open-ended question, and I get all kinds of results from this open-ended question. But more often than not, people will say, yes, scarcity's over. That is, you'll have economic well-being for everybody, everybody will be rich, everybody will be better off, and you'll have conquered poverty, and there won't be any scarcity anymore. But that ignores a lot of things. First of all, the resources in the world are still scarce because there's only a finite amount of them. That's number one. And number two, there still has to be somebody manning or staffing these black boxes, putting things in there and programming them to get the goods and services out on the other end of the box. So that means that labor is still scarce, right? So we haven't eliminated the scarcity of labor, right? So what this kind of tells us is, yes, an invention like this is likely to eliminate poverty, or at least at a minimum, be a tide that lifts all boats and increases economic prosperity, but not necessarily eliminating scarcity out of hand. Okay? Well, we're going to stop there, and we have more lectures to come, but until next time, take care.